In October 1962, the world was preoccupied with the mundane details of daily life. Millions were hailing cabs in Manhattan, heading to work and planning their dinners, entirely unaware of the proximity of a global collapse. Within minutes, this entire landscape was scheduled for total erasure. The buildings, the people, and the very ground beneath them were about to be consumed by a crisis that had already spiraled beyond political control. The preservation of this world didn't depend on a formal peace treaty or a high-level summit. It came down to the quiet, stubborn refusal of a single man operating in the dark. The reality we inherited is the survivor of that choice. We are living in the timeline that was allowed to continue because one officer said no. By late 1962, the Cold War had shifted from abstract ideology to physical confrontation. In Berlin, American and Soviet tanks sat just yards apart, their crews waiting for any excuse to open fire. Retaliation systems were locked in a hair-trigger posture. Radar crews watched for blips, and strategic bombers idled, prepared to launch immediately if a single shot fired. High-level diplomacy had effectively ceased to function. The direct lines between Washington and Moscow were silent, and the ambassadors on both sides had run out of words to bridge the gap. Power had devolved to the local level. Commanders on the ground and at sea were equipped with tactical nuclear weapons and the authority to use them if they believed their units were under direct threat. The bureaucratic machine was now a runaway train. The systems designed to prevent war were instead rapidly accelerating toward it, leaving no room for a top-down solution. The center of this storm was a Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine, designated B-59, operating deep in the Caribbean. Trapped beneath the surface by American destroyers, the crew was suffocating. The air conditioning had failed, temperatures inside the hull hit 110 degrees, and they were completely cut off from radio communications with their high command. When American forces began dropping practice depth charges to force the sub to surface, the massive concussive shocks convinced the exhausted crew that a hot war had already broken out above them. Inside B-59 was a tactical nuclear torpedo with a 15-kiloton yield. It was capable of wiping out the entire American fleet on the surface in a single blinding flash. The men inside believed they were the last surviving combatants of a dead nation. Holding the trigger for retaliation, they prepared to strike back at a world they assumed was already gone. Arming the nuclear torpedo required a mechanical safeguard to ensure no single officer could launch a strike alone. Under Soviet protocol, launching required unanimous consent. 3 senior officers, captain, political officer, and flotilla commander, had to independently authorize it. Convinced they were under attack, the captain gave the order. The political officer agreed. 2 votes were locked in. The entire course of the future was now funneled into the final decision of one man, Vasili Arkhipov. Despite the heat and the explosions rattling the hull, Arkhipov refused to move. He argued that practice charges were not proof of war, and that without explicit orders from Moscow, their duty was to remain submerged rather than escalate. Arkhipov stood as a wall against the momentum of the moment. He absorbed the fury of his superiors and anchored himself in a silence that overruled the entire chain of command. Arkhipov's veto held. The torpedo was powered down, and B-59 slowly ascended to the surface. When the hatch opened, the crew didn't see a wasteland. They saw the American Navy waiting for them in a tense but functioning world. If that torpedo had been launched, it would have activated the full-scale retaliatory protocols of both superpowers. The resulting automated exchange would have decimated the population centers and industrial networks of the Northern Hemisphere in an afternoon. Humanity's closest brush with extinction ended because an officer decided to do nothing. We usually measure history through the actions of those who lead charges or give grand speeches. We look for the moments where someone took a decisive step forward. But Arkhipov's role was to remain stationary while the world around him screamed for war. He didn't save the world with a maneuver. He saved it by being the only thing that wouldn't budge. Because of that silence, the infrastructure of the modern world remained intact. The last 60 years of human progress only exist because that one link in the chain of command refused to break. It is a reminder of the fragility of our timeline. Our continued existence often relies on the invisible restraint of an ordinary person standing at the ultimate bottleneck of history.